Well, most of the media remains absolutely consumed by the Trump regime's scandals, especially right now the Jeffrey Epstein files scandal, lawsuits, and culture war stunts. Behind the scenes, the White House is executing a calculated and deeply anti democratic strategy in advance of the 2026 midterms. This has nothing to do with campaigning. This is about controlling the outcome of those elections before a single vote is even cast. This is incredibly important. We need to keep our eyes on it. So let's break it down. According to internal White House sources and new reporting from Axios, the Trump regime is already deploying what senior advisor Chris LaCivita has called a quote unquote multi-dimensional effort to keep and expand congressional control, not just through endorsements or fundraising, but by rewriting the rules of the game themselves. Since January, Donald's allies have been drafting restrictive voting laws, probing state election systems, and undermining key oversight offices. It's very important to remember that Republicans planned it so that the worst provisions of the big abominable bill won't kick in until after the midterms, which will give them a better chance to win, in their view. If the Democrats win the midterms, however, all of the fallout will be on them. And Republicans plan to blame Democrats for the economic catastrophes that are built in to the Republicans' bill. So let's break all of this down. Step one, manipulate the map. Donald has already backed a scheme to redraw the congressional map in Texas, despite the fact that it's not a redistricting year. As Axios first reported, his political team is pressuring Texas Republicans to add 5 new seats, each tailored for Republican wins. This is a blatant attempt to add GOP numbers by fabricating districts that don't exist under current law. Donald has even floated doing the same thing in other red states, and this is how he pitched it.
On Texas, how many more seats do you want the Republicans to draw?
5.
And then what if California, New York, Illinois, and other blue states?
Yeah, well, that's okay too, but 5. I think we get 5. And there could be some other states. We're going to get another 3 or 4 or 5 in addition. Texas would be the biggest one, and
So
that'll be 5.
Are you calling then for a complete redrawing of the congressional map?
No, it's just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
It is rather amazing that he says this as if this is totally fine and above board. That is a member of the executive branch interfering with state election law. Meanwhile, blue states are fighting fire with fire, as they should. California Governor Gavin Newsom and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker have publicly warned that if Republicans rewrite the rules, Democrats will not sit back and lose on an uneven playing field. So, if Republicans are going to rig the game, why shouldn't Democrats be playing by the rules Republicans just made up? Here's Newsom on Pod Save America last week explaining.
Gerrymandering, and let's be fair, we've seen this weaponized by both parties for decades. But these guys, this is a whole nother level of weaponization coming from the right. And what Trump did today is the ultimate tell. They feel they're on the ropes. They feel they're behind. They feel they're vulnerable with the big, beautiful bill. They feel like the momentum is shifting away from them. And it's Speaker Jeffries. It's not Speaker Johnson. So on that basis, they got to rig the game. You got to change the game because you can't win by the existing rules. They're using that special session to weaponize for the next election. And that should scare the hell out of everybody because these guys are playing by a different set of rules. And so from my perspective, if we're going to play fair in a world that is wholly unfair, we may have the higher moral ground, but the ground is shifting from underneath us. And I think we have to wake up to that reality. And I'm talking to members of my legislature, what are our alternatives? We can do a special session. I can call for one today if I chose to. We can then put something on the ballot, and I could call a special election. We can change the Constitution with the consent of the voters, and I think we would win that. I think people understand what's at stake in California. I think we'd come out in record numbers. I think it would be extraordinary success.
As we mentioned, and luckily, Newsom and Pritzker are not alone in this fight. A few Democratic leaders are seeing the writing on the wall and making a move. California Representative Jared Huffman said it best, quote, "It's a race to the bottom, and I wish we weren't in this place, but they have sort of forced the conversation. I mean, are we just going to sit back and take it, unquote? Sitting back and taking it is something Democrats have been doing for quite some time now. They continue to play by rules that no longer exist. Why? Because their Republican colleagues, whom Democrats pretend still are owed respect and allegiance, set the rule book on fire decades ago. We need this kind of shift. We need a Democratic Party that is willing to get down into the mud and fight. I am not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that we lie, cheat, or steal. I am not at all suggesting that we act like Republicans. What I'm saying is, if we are under attack and under threat, the way Republicans have been attacking and threatening Democrats, the American people, and American democracy, we have to be willing to fight by their rules. We cannot be polite. You do not bring politesse to a machine gun fight. So it is good to see Democrats beginning to understand that when the game is rigged, you either fight according to the game's rules or you lose. And in this case, we could potentially lose everything. Step 2, suppress the vote. In the name of so-called election security, Donald's House allies passed the SAVE Act, which would force all voters to present government-issued ID not only when voting, but also when registering. Voting rights groups say the bill would disproportionately impact married women whose ID names may differ from their registration, rural voters, and Black Americans. The League of Women Voters, NAACP, and Brennan Center for Justice have all sounded the alarm that the bill could make it dramatically harder for millions to vote, especially students, the elderly, and naturalized citizens. But it doesn't stop at legislation. As the Washington Post reported on July 16th, Donald's White House is also attempting to force states to hand over voter roll data, open voting machines to inspection, and comply with their own so-called election integrity standards, even in states with no history of fraud. I just want to say something really quickly because it's very important to remind ourselves of this. Election fraud in this country is practically non-existent. Out of the last billion votes cast, one was found to be fraudulent. That is a vanishingly tiny number of instances of fraud. Voter fraud is not a thing. According to the Washington Post, at least 9 states, including Colorado, Wisconsin, and New York, have received requests for information about their voting processes. Local officials called the demands invasive and a quote unquote hard stop. Some were even pressured by outside operators aligned with Donald's former campaign. This is not oversight. This is surveillance. Colorado's Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, said bluntly, quote, "They're actively in a power grab," unquote. Again, this is not about voter fraud, which does not exist to all intents and purposes. This is about voter suppression. This is about voter subversion. Donald Trump and his allies are collecting ammunition with the intention of interfering with the way in which blue states run their elections. The goal is to rewrite the rules before the first vote is cast in November of 2026. Step 3, lay the blame. Let's talk about the timing of all of this. Because many of the most damaging pieces of Donald's so-called big abominable bill, including Medicaid work requirements, SNAP restrictions, and student loan cuts, as I mentioned earlier, don't take effect until after the 2026 midterms. Donald knows how wildly unpopular these policies are. So he is already planning to blame Democrats for the fallout when it occurs, because it will, regardless of who controls Congress. If red state voters feel the squeeze, the White House can simply say, well, Congress cut your benefits because of Democratic obstruction, or some version of that. It's a classic bait and switch. Roll out the punishment, wait for the backlash, and then blame the other party. They're already lining up scapegoats. Step 4, undermine the courts. One of Donald's biggest political threats is Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, a principled voice who is consistently challenged the right-wing majority with powerful dissents. This is a woman who is writing for history. If the Republican Party ends up challenging Democratic victories, these court cases will eventually end up at the Supreme Court, where even if the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court sides with Donald, Jackson will no doubt make her opinions known and fight with everything she has against them. So, what's the plan on the right? Discredit her appointment, and worse. Representative James Comer, chair of the House Oversight Committee, is now probing President Biden's use of the fucking Autopen. This is a routine device for signing executive orders, proclamations, and appointments that has been used by every president since it was invented in 1940. Comer is using this as a thinly veiled excuse to question the legality of Biden's signature on judicial confirmations, including Justice Jackson's. Here's Comer pretending this is a legitimate scandal.
This comes as concerns swirl around how many of the President Biden's nominations were signed using the Autopen. Biden made 228 judicial appointments, including 45 appeals court and 187 district court judges. And most importantly, Biden appointed Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that you're looking at some of the pardons that were done under President Biden and the use of the Autopen. Are you also looking into Biden's judicial appointments as well?
Absolutely. Everything that was signed with the Autopen, especially in the last year of the Biden presidency. This is when all the books that are being written, all the tell-all interviews that are being recorded from his former disgruntled staffers and staffers who are trying to preserve their reputation for future employment, they're all saying that Joe Biden was in a deep mental decline and that he was protected by a very small inner circle.
The shamelessness with which these people lie continues to stun me, even though I guess I should be used to it by now. But what Comer said is complete nonsense. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources, but it's also incredibly dangerous. How about this? Why don't we look into how many of the January 6th pardons Donald signed using an Autopen and see what we can do about that? Last term, Justice Jackson issued 24 opinions, the second highest total of any justice, and her dissents routinely outshone the majority rulings in their impact and their clarity. That's what Donald's team cannot withstand. A brilliant Black woman who tells the truth and doesn't play along. As Donald and his squad of sycophants in the Department of Justice try to lock in power through gerrymandering, voter suppression and subversion and disinformation, voters are starting to see through it and push back. Donald's effort to pre-rig the midterms may be moving full steam ahead, but the voters are onto it. A brand new CNN SSRS poll just found that 72% of Democratic-leaning voters now say they're extremely motivated to vote in the 2026 midterms. That is up 10 points since October. Meanwhile, Republican enthusiasm is cratering. The same poll shows a 17-point drop in GOP voters who say they're highly motivated to cast a ballot. The cracks are showing and they're widening, and it could be in part because Donald underestimated just how much his following is willing to be lied to by him on a regular basis. Because just in the last 2 months, Donald has stabbed his followers in the back on issues they care about. Here's just a partial list. Donald has ignored congressional authority in order to launch an unauthorized strike on Iran, a country that posed no imminent threat to the United States. He's alienated MAGA influencers and veterans with his escalating war rhetoric. He's lied about the Epstein files while quietly, and not so quietly, trying to keep that case buried. He's cut healthcare and food assistance from working class Americans. He's added $3.4 trillion to the national deficit with his big abominable bill, which, by the way, is $1 trillion more than originally expected. He's lowered the power of the dollar in the global market. He's increased inflation due to his absurd and dangerous tariffs. This is not just a battle over the midterms and whether or not they are held in a way that will accurately reflect the will of the American people. This is a referendum on whether American democracy survives another cycle of Donald's authoritarian sabotage and the fascist Republican Party's willingness to go along with it. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.